everybody, and welcome back to Iain the Tech Bear. I'm your host, Iain Bennett, and we're going to talk about something I received 40 years ago next month, and that is this lovely bread bin of a machine, the Commodore 64. So this was my original Commodore 64. Right now, it is broken. So when I was working on my archival project to take some of the floppy disks I have and back them up to an SD card, the machine died. So I have a gut feeling I know what it is. I'll talk about that later in this episode. So this is the machine that, wow, I did everything on it. And, well, we're going to talk about all that. The Commodore 64. So Commodore created a monster of a machine. They were really sort of making their mark, starting with, they started with, it depends on how far back you go back with the company, because they originally started out as a typewriter repair shop. And started with making typewriters and office equipment here in Toronto, actually, on Queen Street. So who knew they actually had a Canadian connection? So there you go. That's your Canadian connection for today's episode. That Commodore actually started in Canada. However, they soon expanded into adding machines and calculators. My mom actually had a Commodore calculator, which I have somewhere. I'll have to get a picture of it, which was really epic, from the 1980s, actually, early 80s, late 70s. So Jack Tramiel, who was the founder of the company, decided that, hey, electronics are where it's at, and calculators are where it's at, and that steamrolled into their computer line, starting with the CBM machines. So they were more business machines. The PET, so the personal electronic transactor, if I have that acronym right, which was really the first computer that I actually regularly used in school. So way back then, the school board that I was in actually had a whole bunch of Commodore machines, and they were PETs at the time. So 4032s, and I think the 8032s, if I remember the model numbers correctly off the top of my head. So Commodore was a big name back in the 70s, along with Radio Shack and Apple, and it was really sort of that fight, including also Texas Instruments, right? So from there, they released the VIC-20, which was kind of in a similar form factor to the bread bin Commodore 64 that I just showed a few moments ago. And then they brought out the Commodore 64. And what a monster of a machine. I know I've used that term before. And by monster, this machine sold 30 million units between 1982 and 1993. It is in the Guinness Book of World Records for the #1 computer sold. So specific computer, Commodore 64, etc. versus like PCs. Obviously, way more PCs have been sold, but we're talking about from a single manufacturer. So pretty epic for Commodore to pass that milestone with the Commodore 64. Between the PET, the VIC-20, and which the VIC-20 only had 8K, and the PET had it depended on the model. The Commodore 64 with 64K, it was epic. It was perfect. In some respects, I almost kind of feel like it could have been the Raspberry Pi of its time in some respects, because of some of the expandability and stuff like that. I'll talk about that in a bit. But yeah, a completely epic machine, and it took the world by storm. It wasn't just here in North America that it was big. It was big in Europe as well, and certain parts of Asia. In fact, Commodore tried selling a game machine, the Max machine, that was kind of based on the technology behind the Commodore 64, loosely. It actually played cartridges. Now, talking about this specific machine, um, the story of how this came to be in my life was my dad had sent a letter a few weeks after I received my first computer that I talked about in the last video, which was the Times Clear 1000, had sent a letter preparing for his upcoming visit. He lived in another part of Canada, so had to make plans to see Robin and I. And he was sending his usual letter before doing that. And in the letter, he actually said, "I'd like to buy the kids for Christmas a Commodore 64." My grandmother actually read that letter in front of Robin and I, and my reaction was, "Yes! Oh, wait, is it okay?" Just because of some of the confusion that I had around, hey, was it okay to accept such a large gift from my dad, given my parents' divorce, etc. So it was okay. And when I think about this gift, um, it was really, I mean, the Times Clear was certainly an amazing gift to start, but this was epic, and it really set the stage for my career in IT and software development. So yeah, definitely had a major impact on my life. Let's talk a little bit about that. I know I was typically impatient like a kid would be, right? It's like, oh my god, when are we going to get the Commodore 64 and stuff like that. And Dad, may you rest in peace. I apologize for that, but typical kid stuff. So he took us to, I think it was Stone Road Mall in Guelph. We went to Zellers. So how many of you remember Zellers? They shut down and they're kind of back in Hudson's Bay locations, but yeah, took us to Stone Road Mall, and that's where we picked up the Commodore 64, and then we talked about, do we get a printer? What he said was, well, I'll get the disk drive and I'll get the monitor, and we got a free VIC desk. So talking about Commodore's heritage in building office equipment and furniture, I don't know whether that was one of the last things that they ever built, in terms of their furniture line, but yeah, the VIC desk. It was perfect for placing the monitor, placing the keyboard, the disk drive, and it had a pull-out drawer for putting stuff in, cables, discs, etc. So yeah, that was a very special gift and very expensive for the time. I hazard a guess to convert the amount to dollars today, but I'm guessing that $1,000 was probably about $3,000 or $4,000 today. Let's have a look. That's a lot of money to spend, but it was a huge investment in both our futures. And I know I keep on saying I did a lot with this machine, and I did. So what did I do with this machine? Well, played a lot of games. So I didn't have a lot of software when we first bought the machine. I had to make connections, and I ended up making connections with people. And that's part of kind of the genesis of this channel, that I kind of want to talk about some of those connections and the importance of building that social circle around this computer and other computers. I kind of talked about some of my inspirations on the time at Sinclair 1000, but this, I made a number of friends because we all had the Commodore 64 in common, or other compatible machines, such as the Commodore 128 that came out later. But I digress. So lots of games. I did all my homework on this, so using EasyScript and also GeoWrite once Geos came out. Something I have occasionally talked about, but I have never really talked publicly about, is phreaking. So yeah, along with BBSing and connecting with friends locally, and somewhere in my office here, I actually have my old Rolodex of BBS phone numbers from the GTA. So living where I did, I couldn't dial Toronto because it was long distance from where we lived, but I could dial other areas in and around where I lived that were outside of Toronto. So I grew up in the greater Toronto area. And so I learned about hacking the phone system and dial into Toronto. I did dial Chicago, and I got caught for it. So yeah, my birthday gift in 1989, 88, around that time period, was the phone bill for all the hacking I had done. So I remember that being about $275 back then, so probably double. So yeah, I apologize to my grandmother because yeah, she covered that bill. Not proud of that, but it was a lesson learned, and I think the phone companies learned, because now Toronto is local to where I grew up, and well, we now have really great long distance plans. Thank you, Internet, for that. So, what else did I do? I learned programming on this. So while the Times Clear 1000, I sort of cut my teeth on BASIC, and actually before that, I had learned Logo. I had gone to a Radio Shack Logo summer camp. But this is the machine that I really learned some hardcore programming on. So, obviously BASIC. I also learned 6502 assembler and the Commodore 64 ROM kernels details on how to program, 6502 assembly and machine language. And that was pretty epic. And in fact, I watched a video on YouTube about people building 6502 based computers on breadboards. And it really brought together all my knowledge about 6502 assembly. And I could actually read the code as they were talking about it. It was really quite cool. And really taught me a lot about how slow interpreters are versus, bare metal, if you will. That really showed me just what really goes on inside a computer. I'm not a huge hardware guy. I'm much more of a software guy. I know the basics of hardware, and I've been learning hardware on Arduino, and actually my mom gave me one of those like 3001 kits, more like 200 or 301 kits to build circuits and things like that. It was a little bit too advanced for me when I received it. So, but I've been learning with Arduino and even Raspberry Pi, some of the circuit programming and things like that. But that particular set of videos, and it'll be linked in the description below, the whole series by Ben Eater. Again, epic. It really sort of put into perspective just how processors work and how to interface with RAM, how to interface with ROM, etc., which is all important for machine language and assembly. So also where I learned to program were from magazines such as Compute's Gazette. I still have copies of these around. They talked a lot about, reviews of machines and hardware that was coming out. They had program listings, and so example code, and people could write in asking for support. It's like, hey, how do you do this? And people would respond, and there were game reviews, hardware. Who remembers the Okidata and Okimate printers? That takes us back. Things like, Commodore 64 multitasker. I think I actually had entered this one in, and yeah, it sort of worked, but with 64K of RAM, what are you going to multitask with? Play sounds while graphics and stuff like that, sure. Things like polar art. That's kind of the stuff that I would do on the Times Square 1000. And also, from the UK, this was the first computer magazine I ever bought in the UK when I went on my first trip in 1985. So from computer and video games, there were a number of games to enter. Now, sometimes it was a little hard to understand and read the code because of the way it was laid out. So I'll be honest, I sort of learned a little bit from the examples, but I didn't spend a lot of time actually studying the examples. And had I actually done that, I would have probably learned heaps about game programming and machine language even more and stuff like that. It'd be funny to try and actually enter some of these games in. And actually, what's interesting, this particular magazine has listings for the Spectrum, the Amstrad CPC 464, and other machines other than the Commodore 64, BBC Acorn. So yeah, it'd be fun to kind of learn different kinds of basics on other machines. Anyway, again, back to the Commodore 64. So yeah, this was huge. I did desktop publishing on the Commodore 64. Again, it really set the stage and really inspired me. It got a lot of use in our household, and I'm very surprised that it actually lasted. This computer lasted 39 years from when I first picked it up to almost dying when I was backing up disks. I actually completed that project other than my Geos disks. So I'm hoping to actually get it back working, and so I can actually look at those disks. Now, I actually have two Commodore 64s. I have this one, and I picked one up from the Ontario Institute for Studies in Education, OISE. They, back around 2000, they actually had a clearance of all their 8-bits and some other machines that they had at the time. And so I picked up an additional disk drive and another bread bin Commodore 64 just so that I had it handy as a backup. So am I going to transplant chips from that machine to this Commodore 64 to try and resurrect it? No, because what I have here, and I bought this last year at a Commodore related show, which I'll talk a little bit about. It's a neat PLA from Retro Rewind. So they're a local vendor that sells parts for primarily Commodore computers, but also other computers. And they have something here called a neat PLA. So I think it is the PLA chip that controls devices and such that may have died and just needs to be replaced. It just went black one day. So I don't think it's capacitor related. I should actually replace capacitors on this machine. You want to replace capacitors because they dry up, and when they dry up and they don't let the current flow properly, and it can cause leaks on the motherboard and nasty things. So yeah, I've got a PLA chip to try replacing it. If this doesn't work, then I am going to try other chips, and failing that, then I may have to share it for parts for someone else to try resurrecting on another machine, unless someone wants to try fixing this machine. I'd love to keep it running, but I also have a little something else, and several something else's. This is a Commodore 64 Mini. So it literally is a mini Commodore 64 with 2 USB ports, a power supply, an HDMI port, and a power in USB port. Essentially, FPGA-based emulation. So this is one of your emulation options. I've got my big fish tank of a machine here in blue to match today. You know, also my Nano Leafs, all matching the Commodore 64 blue. Running emulators. So a company called Cloanto has Commodore 64 Forever or C64 Forever, and they also have Amiga Forever, by the way. We'll talk about the Amiga in a future video. So C64 Forever is a complete package, includes ROMs for not just the Commodore 64, but also the CBM, the B machines, the PETs, the VIC, the C64, the Plus4, the Commodore 16, and a few other obscure machines that Commodore came out with in their 8-bit line. So it is an amazing package. I have used it for years, and it works beautifully. Launchbox. So with Launchbox, I use Vice. So Vice is another emulator that supports all of the old Commodore 8-bit machines, including the Commodore 64. And it works brilliantly. And Vice works also with my RetroPie setup upstairs. So it's on multiple machines. In fact, the first Commodore 64 emulation program I ever used was Go64 on the Amiga, because I still wanted to be able to use some of my Commodore 64 programs and stuff. Although it was horribly slow, I don't recommend it on a stock 68,000 based Commodore Amiga, but I do. It should work fine on a 1200, so 68020, 68030 based Amigas. So anyway, we'll hold that thought on the Amiga because this is about the Commodore 64. I hope you've enjoyed this series on the Commodore 64. If you like what you're seeing, please like and subscribe. And I'd love to hear comments on the series as well. What is your history with the Commodore 64? What are your memories and the things that you did with it? Add that to the comments below and enjoy.